or pain or darkness or tribulation, that they are incapable of pronouncing a prayer. So we pray for them. So may this presentation serve as a light for our hearts and minds, and as a light for those in need of comfort. Please bless the speaker, inspire her, and guide her through these moments of learning, and so be it. So we welcome you again if you miss something. So here we have our guest speaker for Carroll County, our dearest Kirsten DeMelo, and she's going to continue talking about the second part of the book, Times of Health and Consciousness. And today she's going to talk about chapter 2, Knowledge and Consciousness. So with no further ado, Kirsten, the stage is yours.
Gracias. Oh, 1 second. Good evening, everyone. Feels weird to say evening when the sun is shining bright and the rays are hitting all of us, right? Thank you all for being here. I know that today is a absolutely beautiful day after several days of rain, that you all made the choice to come here. So we feel honored and privileged that you chose to be here with us. And for those of you who are watching us on the web, welcome. We are glad you are joining us. Or if you're watching the recorded version of this as well, likewise, we are happy to have you. Today is not going to be a boring lecture. Yay, won't be boring. And so much so that we promise if you can really try to follow along, there are gems that we can find and share and talk about. You know, we've talked about this book. It's been a while now, hasn't it? I don't know, half a year maybe, give or take. And yet this remains a topic, health, that is so, well, let me go back. It's a topic and it's an area that in any era that you're living in is popular. And that's why people say, well, if you have a job in the healthcare field, you'll always have a job. Why is that? Not a rhetorical question. Why is that? Why do we think?
Because many people get sick.
Because many people get sick? In all senses. Mm-hmm. Pretty much, that kind of sums it up, right? Anyone else? Yeah, but pretty much, right? We live on a planet of, what kind of planet do we live on? Trial and expiations, yeah. Trials, tribulations, yeah.
Planet of grief.
Planet we're of grief.
Greed.
Greed, oh, one of the vices. I think they call it one of the 7 mortal sins, right? Yeah. Greed, yeah, I mean, all those vices, they're still prevalent, whether they're really obvious or not. We were just watching, it was a documentary about this tragic thing that happened. I won't give energy or life to the story, but let's just say it was a very tragic story, and at the heart of it was greed. And many people ended up losing their lives because of it. And at the end of the story, that's what the detective had determined, that it all had everything to do with greed, because certain people wanted other people's wealth. So
it's also the people that have diabetes, it's also people who have diabetes you inject yourself. It went up to $500.
Ozempic, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it went up thousands and thousands of percent because of greed, and it's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, because the society, people want to look a certain way. So it became very popular amongst celebrities. And so, it trickled down to us non-celebrities. Although its original purpose, was good. But like all things, we can use it from good or bad. But this is where, Marty, that's a great segue. This is where we must contemplate and be aware of knowledge and conscientiousness. And we wanted to give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. Knowledge and conscientiousness. It's okay if you don't remember. I'm bringing it to light now. The last time we met together, the last chapter, Joanna entitled it Acquiring Conscientiousness. It's chapter 1 of part 2, not to be confused with, there's a section going into part 2 that's not labeled. I think it's just called Conscientiousness, I believe. It's like the introductory chapter before the second part starts. So we talked about acquiring conscientiousness. And as we studied this chapter today, knowledge and conscientiousness, we saw how Joanna builds upon each chapter to each chapter. We talked about acquiring consciousness.
I found this on the web.
Sorry, guys, that was my iPhone.
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. Okay, I turned it off. Siri's always listening, right? So the last chapter, Acquiring Conscientiousness, and Joanna defined it as a natural effect of the evolutionary process. This accomplishment will enable you to evaluate good and evil, right and wrong, honor and dishonor, etc., etc. The polarities in the world. And we're going to talk about this effect, this evolutionary process today. So in essence, we're going to briefly touch on, and some of you might remember this when we studied Evolution in Two Worlds, when we've studied the Spirit's book, or even the Genesis talks about something. How many of you are familiar with the phrase spiritual principle and the vital principle or material principle or universal cosmic fluid? Okay. So in summary, born through, and these are our words, not Joanna's, born through the spiritual principle, through internships in the material principle or universal cosmic fluid, our knowledge and conscientiousness develops many times over until the spiritual principle becomes or evolves into the intelligent principle, continues in many internships. So where the line is delineated when knowledge and conscientiousness happens, there's no definitive line. And some might say, well, when we're advancing, from the mineral kingdom to the animal kingdom, to when we become a spirit and we become aware, people sometimes ask, like, well, at what point do we draw a line in the sand and say, this is still an animal? Technically, we're from the animal kingdom, but this is a human. As of right now, we can't say for sure. We don't know. So we're not going to try to hypothesize where that is because it's not the point of our lecture today. Neither will we go wildly into what the spiritual principle is, what the intelligent principle. We're going to do a high-level overview, as we like to say in my profession, when we don't have time to go into all the specifics. But I do encourage you, if you're curious, there's a great lecture by Louise Lima that was given recently on a Saturday morning at the United States Spiritist Federation, their Project Saturday Morning Talks. Daniel, I'm forgetting the name of it. Spiritual Talks, yeah. So at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm sure you can find it on the web, on YouTube, or on their YouTube channel. He has a really good talk going more into depth than I am today. But largely, I took snippets from his overview, which essentially is from the Spirit's book and the Genesis and other parts of the codification. So we want to bring this because we want to frame our talk today. Because in essence, if we were to summarize this chapter, Joanna basically is telling us that through the ages, when we are monads, when we are in the mineral kingdom, in the spiritual principle, as a spiritual principle, and we go through all the different kingdoms, we are slowly evolving over time. But we always carry like these seeds within us that we're going to talk about. But let us go through some basic things that most of you probably already are aware of and know. So God, we know, we view him, her, whatever you want to call it, whatever pronoun, the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. We know that that is what God is, the supreme intelligence, the all-knowing, omniscient. And we know that from God, oh, this is not working. Two things emanate. The spiritual principle and the universal cosmic fluid. These are two separate things. Now, the spiritual principle, and this is where in this chapter Joanna talks about this, contains the seeds of anything that will be spiritual one day. And likewise, the material principle, or the universal cosmic fluid, relates to anything that will be of a material. But inside the UCF, or the universal cosmic fluid, are the seeds that one day be anything related to matter or the material principle. They evolve over time, much like if you've ever watched the development of a small child, or if you've ever given, and I know, Paula, you have done a lot of play therapy with children, so I'm sure you've seen this. If you were to give like a 2-year-old a brand new toy, and you watch them, whether it's blocks or it's Legos or it's, you know, nowadays everything's so much more advanced. There's magnetic things now the kids play with. In the beginning, when they first get the new toy and you watch them, it's very interesting. We've observed this with our children. Like, they're trying to figure it out. Like, what is it? What can I do with it? Can I throw it? No, throwing's bad. Okay, don't do that. So they go through this discovery period. It's the same thing when the spiritual principle does internships with the material principle. It is evolving to a point eventually where it becomes, or it evolves over time with lots of trial and error, to the vital principle. It continues its evolvement to such a point where it becomes the intelligent principle. Still, again, always needing to do internships in the material principle or universal cosmic fluid. So there is a progression, always starting with the spiritual principle and the universal cosmic fluid, the two things that emanate from God and where all things come from. There are a lot of dualities. This is not such a new idea. As through many internships and evolution happens, eventually spiritual principle working with the material principle evolves to the intelligent principle. And then the intelligent principle, again, continuing to act upon the material principle, becomes slightly more advanced. So then we reach the plant kingdom. Then we reach the animal kingdom, until a point where through many internships in these areas, the intelligent principle and internships within these material principles, at some point, again, don't know exactly when it happens. We can't say on this 1 billionth reincarnation, can't say it, don't know it. At some point we become a spirit, and all throughout all of this whole process, we carry seeds that are just waiting to germinate at the right time, such as consciousness, conscientiousness. And we talked about acquiring conscientiousness last week, that even as a human being, we can reach awareness, but conscientiousness is when we are aware and our behaviors reflect that. And of course, once we evolve to the point of a spirit, once we evolve to a point where we have many internships as the spirit, losing my notes, we also begin to act upon a different type of matter called imponderable matter and ponderable. Simply put, ponderable is what you can touch. It's tangible. You can detect it with your senses. And imponderable, you can say it's everything that you can't physically touch or sense with your five senses, but more so, kind of like the sixth sense. So eventually, it evolves. The spiritual principle, working with the UCF, Universal Cosmic Fluid, evolves into the vital principle, in which it gives life to the intelligent principle, doing internships here, evolving even further. And mind you, this isn't just like, 2 or 3 lifetimes. This is millennia. Why are we saying all this? Because this is what's interesting, what Joanna says in this chapter, and we're going to touch on this here in a second. And we talked about, she mentioned this in the previous chapter, about the seed of knowledge that we carry down from all of the internships. And the internships is the word I'm using because in the book Evolution in Two Worlds, I believe it's one of the terms that Andrea Louise uses, or it was a translation that I read. And the recapitulation, living again and again different experiences in the mineral kingdom, then in the plant kingdom, and then in the animal kingdom, and then as a spirit, experiencing life in our physical bodies. But all throughout this, the highlights, let me go forward. I want you just to remember something. The 2 basic principles that emanate from God, the spiritual principle and the material principle. Note the spiritual principle, all things that are spiritually related comes from there. And the universal cosmic fluid are the seeds. Inside are the seeds that one day will be related to matter or the material principle. So hold that in your mind as we dive into what Joanna says. That she says, here we have the understanding of life, very high level overview. But then she says, as we go into the analysis of human behavior, Jung, and if you aren't familiar with who Carl Gustav Jung is, famous Austrian psychiatrist, therapist, Jung found in all people there's a predominant belief in 3 factors essential to life: God, the survival of the soul after death, and beneficent action for others as well as for ourselves. So God, life after death, doing good to others and to yourself. He found that this is the predominant belief. And Joanna goes on to say, it varies in name and how the philosophy and the religious faith, but these 3 principles are fundamental to sustaining the social group and individual happiness. This is very fascinating. When it seems as though in this day and age, happiness, seems to escape the vast majority of people. We go through many periods of suffering. We're constantly searching for our happiness. And if you read in the gospel, we know that the true happiness, because of the planet that we live on, we may not be able to experience even a happiness that we're not even aware of. But we can still experience moments of happiness, of gratitude, of joy. But a lot of us, we forget about number 1, Not because we're bad people. Sometimes our minds just get, perhaps, distracted. But it's interesting when she says that these three things are fundamental to sustaining our social group and individual happiness. So if we can hold these three truths, these principles, whether God is referred to as Yahweh or Allah or any other term or word or phrase that someone uses it, it's the belief in the higher power, that there is something greater than us, and that there's a possibility of life beyond this life. Joanna says these are basic concepts that have supported ethics and philosophical thought, opening broader perspectives for integrating the individual into the social group. It gives us the understanding of what is right, what is wrong, and for us to be more open-minded. And here's where I asked you to remember in the beginning when we talked about the spiritual principle. Joanna said something very interesting, kind of a revelation. She says, these manifestations originate in the spiritual self, and we put in brackets, spiritual principle. These manifestations originate in the spiritual self and are brought from the spirit world, its home prior to reincarnation. She goes on to say that Jung, in his desire to explain how generations and generations of human beings seem to have carried down knowledge, awareness, how was that possible if everyone, for the mass majority, don't believe in life after death or in previous lives? So Jung's way to explain that was his archetype of the collective. Now, Joanna doesn't say that he's wrong. He just says that was his way to try to explain this. That all of these things, the knowledge that we carry down from one life to the next, let me go back. From the time we are created all the way down the different kingdoms, we carry in seed form our history with us. And Joanna says all of that originate in the spiritual self, and not just from what Jung was saying. This is what she says. Therefore, Jung's concept of the collective archetype, which she drew upon in trying to explain the belief, instead of having arisen in the individual and having been transmitted to subsequent generations, has its causality in the spiritual origin of life, which remains in seed form, and we put in brackets, spiritual principle, in the process of evolution until it takes form and expression in the current consciousness. And we put in brackets, when we become a spirit, we become aware, these seeds germinate. Does that make sense? Of all the therapies that exist out there in the world, which are valid, needed, but one of the principal, and we would cautiously, we ourselves are using this word, not Joanna, the pillars of our happiness and our sanity, our happiness in our social groups, rely on these three principles, these what we call three pillars, basic, very basic. And we can see them in many religions, in using different terms, different ways. But most belief systems, creeds, religions have a belief in a higher power. They have the desire to help others and ourselves, and have some notion that there is life after here. But if we were to do an analysis of the social groups that are devoid of these three principles, therein we would find ones that are struggling a great deal. Because Joanna says these are fundamental to sustaining individual happiness and sustaining the social group. And we'll get to why that is here in a second or a minute. And what is really rewarding, or not rewarding, what is really gives us solace is that Joanna reminds us, like, hey, throughout our lives, throughout our generations, highly evolved spirits who have mastered these virtues in different religious arenas, who have developed them, they come as missionaries in different religious areas and creeds across the globe. Some in India, maybe some in China, some in the Middle East, all over. They come, Joanna reminds us, and the Spirits book also talks about this. She says, quote, necessarily over time, highly evolved missionary spirits have taken these principles, God, life after death, and being kind to others and yourself, appearing in various forms of belief and religions with worship forms compatible with the cultural stage of each era, people, and race. And she goes on to say that to the degree that their deeper meanings are learned, they become divested of unnecessary formulas and become ethical behavior toward life, oneself, and one's neighbor. So the more evolved, the deeper the meanings are, they lose that unnecessary formulas. And what are unnecessary formulas? Now, we want to be really cautious what we're about to say so as not to offend, because all religions have purpose, all belief systems have a place. It's like a school. Some people prefer Montessori schools, some people prefer Waldorf, and the rest of us, we can afford public school because it's free. That's what we get. So they're all different schools, and that's okay. It's okay, because at the core, hopefully, we're all learning similar things. But she says, as we go deeper and deeper into the meanings, that the exterior, and that might look like the rituals that some people have in certain religious or creeds that people hold. You know, the necessity to light a candle or to play a music or to do something that's repetitive externally in order for that thing to be given worth. Now, again, I will like to remind us that in the book, Between Heaven and Earth, they talk about the mentor. They talk about the spiritual colony called Mansão Paz, or Peace Mansion. And there they actually have, in this spiritual colony, they have sort of a universal space where people can come and worship God. And Andrea Luis goes into this huge space and begins to know the various religions that are being practiced all across this huge room. And he turns to the mentor and was like, there's a woman over there. She's clearly Catholic. She has a statue of Mother Mary, of Jesus, St. Francis. And Andrea Luis goes to the mentor like, what's up with that? And he says, wait a second, Andrea. If this brings peace and joy and allows that person to ascend emotionally, That's all right. That's okay. And he took note of another person who looked like they had a statue of the Buddha, someone else that was doing other types of religious ceremonies. And he was really sort of intrigued by this. But the mentor, again, explained to him, this is all okay. If this is what helps them to connect to God, that's okay. Is it necessary? No. But do we get into certain habits? Yes. And if for now that brings them joy, so be it. If it makes them happy, so be it. She goes on to say, they enable individuals to fully integrate with their Creator. That's what's important. With their Creator, themselves, and others. Oh, is it? Oh. Action, reaction. Ooh, wow. Oh, thank you, Leo. Wow. I feel such ashamed. I've read that book so many times. It's too many books in my head. She continues to reveal in this chapter other revelations that we were sort of like, when we were reading this for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth time, trying to really understand the profound teachings that she's sharing here. She reminds us, without this identification, happiness is impossible. No one is really happy alone. We are meant to be social beings. I love that she says the following phrase, because some might say, well, Joanna, sometimes being alone or solitary for a time is good. We love that she validates this, and she says the following: voluntary exile, and solitudes are methods for mental, emotional, and behavioral discipline. However, once the control of the will is achieved, its application in everyday life and human relationships will attest to its effectiveness and the results of the endeavor. So wise is Joanna, and so up to date is this information. Because nowadays, and even before, there are retreats where you can go on a silent retreat. There is also this, I don't know what to call it. It's not a retreat, but it's an experience where you sit for 24 hours in complete darkness. And some people do this because they say, and without taking any medication, like nothing than their prescribed medication, like blood pressure or something, but they sit in complete darkness, and their intent is to do a deep meditation. And there have been studies that have been shown that doing this has positive effects on the brain. So she's saying those things are not wrong. But what we must remember is that we still need to go and live in society. And she says, because that will be the true testament to see the effectiveness and the results of our personal endeavor. If I spent 2 weeks at a Buddhist retreat, and then we come back and struggle or completely go back to our negative habits, whether we're, abusing alcohol or we're just, doing things that are not good for us, not good for others, then it's like, well, maybe you need to spend some more time doing some more inner reflection. But let's also remember something that Joanna says again and again and again. Oh, I don't have my watch. Okay. Someone give me the time. Oh, I have it on my phone. Wow. Let us remember to have compassion with ourselves, because we are in the process of evolution. That's not to say that we should be perfect all the time, because the reality is we're not going to be perfect. But we can try to do our best. And we love that Joanna reminds us that untested experience is an ornament that cannot be trusted. Unapplied knowledge is information ignorant of its purpose. And we often have said or used the analogy of, it's akin to owning a famous painting of Monet or Degas or Leonardo da Vinci, and you own this beautiful, piece of art that's worth trillions of millions, and it sits on your wall. It's beautiful. It has historical value. There's so much richness to it. Not to mention the energy that it carries, because for so many decades. But then all it is like an ornament on a tree. It's beautiful. But that's exactly what it is when we have the knowledge and we don't apply it. It's like a Monet on the wall you have in your house. It's like, oh yeah, I know about Spiritism. It sits on my wall. I have all the books. It sits on but we don't apply it. She just says that. She just says, do what you want with this information. But this is what it is. At the end of the day, we are social beings. And she reminds us, one of the 3 principles that she mentioned, God, life after death, that the knowledge of immortality leads individuals to behave ethically toward their neighbor, doing everything according to the standard that comprises their ideal and which they would like to receive in return. And we would go as far as saying that even those who do not believe in life after death or being immortal, there are atheists out there that sometimes are kinder than some who proclaim to be of this or that religion. Why is that? Because there's something deeper within them that maybe they don't have the words to categorize it in a way that our world will understand it. Or maybe the God that they has been shoved down their throat wasn't the true idea of a God. Because in their heart, they are a Christian and don't know it. But we do know that knowledge of life after death makes us think again what we're going to do to ourselves and to others. Joanna goes on to say, in this sentiment of solidarity lies the challenging goal to be reached in their evolutionary process and self-alignment. In this sentiment of solidarity lies the challenging goal to be reached in their evolutionary process and self-enlightenment. She ends with the following: questions and troubling circumstances arising in the social context as important and accounting for countless conflicts that cause unhappiness, give way to legitimate aspirations to plenitude, which are set above seemingly important trivial matters, frivolities, waste of time, emotional resources. This is because the certainty of the divine causality and its justice promotes a real understanding of the contents in favor of one's own future, which begins at that point. Therefore, rational, logical, and emotional knowledge about God, rational, logical, and emotional knowledge about God, the soul's survival, the act of loving one's neighbor, gives us, individuals, the understanding about our humanity and our future and glorious destiny. And she ends out this chapter reminding us, that was just to make sure you guys were awake, reminds us of the great codifier, Allan Kardec, who always, she says, was concerned about the issue of happiness, asked the high order mentors how to focus on it. And they answered in question 919 of the Spirit's book. The question was, what is the most effective means for improving ourselves in this life and for resisting the draw of evil? What do you guys think it is? What is the most effective means for improving ourselves and for resisting evil? What was that? Prayer, love and prayer, good habits, willpower. What's that? Compassion. These are all wonderful things, and they're all true. But the response that was given, a sage, a sage of antiquity. Well, because Daniel's a sage of antiquity, right? A sage of antiquity has told you, know thyself. But this is what we're going to end out today's talk with, is a question for our audience. Why? Why is it that knowing yourself is a means for improving and resisting the draw of evil, our bad tendencies, our negative habits? Why? What is it about knowing yourself that serves as a means for us to become the best versions of ourselves? This is not a rhetorical question. I want you all to think about. Oh, okay. Why is knowing yourself an effective means for improving ourselves? Marty, hold on.
Because we know our weaknesses.
Because we know our weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Antonia? Oh, okay. Sorry, Jeanette.
We know our limits.
We know our limits. We know our limits. We know our weaknesses. Okay. We know our vices.
Yeah, when we perceive ourselves, because I think something very bad is when you don't notice you are making wrong, and then you go on making wrong, and you don't realize that. So there is an illusion, there is an ignorance, there is a lack of understanding. And so if you know yourself, you say, no, I'm not going to go there. Because if I go there, I'm going to have an argument.
Mm-hmm.
Very knowledgeable. Don't go. Avoid it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Perfect. Oh, Eloise?
Know yourself, you can avoid a lot of mistakes.
Knowing yourself can avoid, yeah. Great point. Daniel?
Lewis saying, know your weakness and strength to avoid difficulties and to progress faster. And Yvonne is saying, we can live with purpose.
You can live with purpose, yes. Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Leo, as well, watching on the web. Paula?
I absolutely love and support knowing yourself.
Oh, pull it closer.
Oops.
It's okay.
I absolutely agree with knowing yourself, and that is a lifelong journey.
Mm.
I would like to wrap that in accepting and loving yourself.
Mm. Absolutely.
All of the above.
Yes. Yes. That was a very common answer on my nursing boards. All of the above. That's the one that always got people. Yes, all of the above. All of the above. We cannot change what we are not aware of or cognizant of. And we heard this saying, and I think it could be applied to a lot of things, but I read or heard this at some point in my life. To know God is to love God. And to Paula's point, to know ourselves is to love ourselves. But as Paula shared, it is a process. And the very last thing, next to last thing, before we go to some steps, we would love to hear from those of you who are more experienced, how and the ways in which throughout your life you continue to get to know yourself. What do you do in a practical sense, right? I do this with my patients all the time. Like, okay, here's an idea. How do I make it so it makes sense to them in their everyday life? Like, okay, eating healthy is important. Okay, so how do you eat healthy? What do you like to eat? So, just giving you an example. Can anyone share their tips or things that they do to work on knowing themselves? Alba.
I apply what San Agustin is suggesting us in the Gospel according to Spiritism. At night, before going to bed, just reflect about my day, the pros and cons, successes, areas of improvement. Close my eyes, and here we go again, another day, and the same, and the same. And obviously, this is an ongoing task. I also recently decided to go to spiritual retreats 2 or 3 times per year to truly unplug from electronics or social media, whatever is going on, and have a space and time to center in myself. And also, another way to be aware of the things that I need to change is because I made mistakes. I fall. I hit the wall. I commit the error. So, and I saw it. So, that's the harsh part of learning. But I would say those 3.
It's great. Thank you for sharing that, Alba. Anyone else? What are your tips? What can you recommend to others if there are people watching now or watching the recorded version of this and they're like, well, what do I do on a day-to-day basis? Paula.
In the process of knowing myself, I understand the need I have to be less driven as a personality. Therefore, concentrating on a gratitude list for all the blessings and support I have, and also concentrating on what I do right list. And I don't mean it in an egoic sense. It's a sense of balancing out an inner tendency I have. So, and another thing I found very helpful, and this, means high trust and confidentiality with 1 or 2 very close friends. I want to hear what they're seeing in me. And within the safety of the relationship, I can hear both.
Wow. That's powerful. Yeah. That's really powerful. Thank you both for sharing your bravery. That's great advice.
I think that it's also very important, for example, if you make this recognition of faults and, that you didn't do exactly because you wanted to, offend somebody, or, it happens eventually, we live full of emotions. And I think be patient with yourself and be patient with others. Then you realize that we are all learning, we are all on the process, because it's the easiest thing to do is make an error, because when you are too involved in something, you sometimes don't realize what you're saying or what you're doing, and that's bad. And sometimes, say, I didn't mean to do that, but I did a great thing.
Mhm.
And I think this flexibility and humbleness sometimes is the key to go on learning and making a progress. Because some people, I see many people very defensive. No, I didn't make a mistake. And if I did, I don't know. It's like the person is very proud, I think. I don't know. Or very afraid of not being um, accepted or whatever. And I think this is suffering. It's a lot of suffering, So,
Yeah, thank you, Joni, for sharing that. And just as a last few tips to share, just some possible ways to become more self-aware, to get to know yourself. Paula, you mentioned one of them, and Alba, and all of you in some way, shape, or form have kind of acknowledged some of these things that are here. Asking for feedback so that you can identify and modify any incorrect views that you may have established about yourself. Recognizing your strengths and weaknesses. This will allow you to sustain your strengths and work on your weaknesses or areas of improvement. Self-reflect. This can unlock thoughts and emotions that might otherwise be disregarded. Monitor your self-talk. They're all important. Monitor your self-talk, I would say, for us was a big one, because we oftentimes are so automatic. What's that? Yes. But yes, so like it's such a habit that it almost becomes unconscious, where you walk by a mirror and you go, oh God, I look terrible. Or you'll be trying to do something, or you're struggling with a sibling or a neighbor or a particular emotional challenge, and you'll start saying to yourself, man, you're so impatient. Like, can't you just be more better? More better, is that a word? I don't think that's the right word. Can't you just be a better version of yourself? Can't you be nicer? Why can't you be more Christian? Why can't you be more this? So we begin to have this inner dialogue. And I remember the first time I heard this outside of Spiritism was in 2001, when I bought a book by, why now am I forgetting it? Dr. Phil. That was right, I think, at the height of when he started becoming popular. It was a book about relationships. And it was the first time I read, I believe it was in that book, when he talked about monitoring your self-talk. Because how we talk to ourselves, it's important for us to make sure that we're being positive as well, because we do have this inner critic, some more stronger than others, but that you celebrate your wins and don't dwell on your failures more than you need to. But enough to know, okay, that wasn't perhaps the best way to go about things, but I've learned, and now I'm going to reroute myself. And this is interesting. Practicing saying no, setting yourself a goal for the number of temptations you will resist each day. Saying no may not give you immediate gratification, but instead long-term gain. Question your decisions, ensuring that any decisions you make are good ones by coming up with 3 reasons as to why you should pursue them. This will allow you to better understand your motives and be confident that you have chosen the best available options. These are just some ways that we found on the internet. Pinterest is great for these things, because for us, we're always thinking about the practicality of things. Like, how do I bring this into my everyday life? And here you go. Most of you are sharing most of this. So kudos to all of you. Thank you all for listening and being active. And for those on the web that were also listening. I don't know if that was me or not, but so we can open up if anyone if anyone would like to make any comments, or dare I say questions, which don't have to. But you all interacted. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question, and it's actually more of a concept. In Spanish, I learned the concept of inconsciente colectivo, which is the collective unconscious. Is that the same that the collective archetype?
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know Joanna doesn't say that specifically, but she says the archetype, which I think she's trying to encompass all of it. So yeah,
Okay.
that was what I took away from her. Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
Thank you all for, I know we try to make this interactive while we're doing the talk, so we all don't feel the pressure to have to ask questions at the end of the talk, myself included. You know, at the end of someone's talk, I'm like, oh, I gotta think of something. But it's okay. You all were super interactive. So, Paula, did you have anything? Or I'll give you another minute. But if no one had any, Daniel, is there anything on the web or? Okay, great. Paula, microphone. The green.
Yeah, if you could just reflect on, as one is acquiring more self-knowledge.
Put a little closer to you.
Whoops.
It's okay.
If you could please reflect on, as one is in the process of acquiring more self-knowledge, just strengthening your awareness and will, it seems then that there's a test in order to, I guess, affirm that you got it. Because there's so many moments where we're like on a roll and I've got it, and then something pops up.
And it alerts you that you don't really got it. And that's okay. That's okay. But that's a part of life. I actually was reading something in the back when we were doing a sound check earlier today. There was a phrase there in the back. There was a quote. So we will continue to go through experiences until we have learned the lesson. And then once we have learned that lesson and we experience it and are okay, then the next lesson comes. And we might experience this in such a way that you feel like, oh man, I've really mastered this. This is great. I was able to forgive this person, and you're on cloud 9 because you feel good about yourself. And then smack dab the next week, something else pops up, because that is the nature of, we're evolving. It's like, okay, we've somewhat mastered this. Okay, now on to the next. What else? I worked through a really good yoga instructor, very, very spiritual young woman, and she was one of the folks that had shared with us this idea of truly embracing all experiences, that nothing's bad or good. It's that old Shakespeare quote that things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So, of course, for the sake of categorization, we could say this thing is good or not good, or light or devoid of light, right? But if we learn to be more accepting of what's happening to us, happening around us, then we're able to more easily go through our challenges, because we're not constantly fighting. You know, we're not constantly hitting that wall. And that's why obedience and resignation in the gospel, according to Spiritism, there's a chapter on it, and I forget which chapter it is, but is, I think, the most undervalued chapter in the gospel. Because once we understand, when we put our trust in the Creator and resign ourselves, not to give up, but to say, I accept. Let me experience this and walk through it, because I am strong. So if that is, anyone else have any further questions or comments? If not, Daniel? Okay, great. Okay. Okay, yeah, do you want to repeat it? Yeah, on the mic.
So Abby just comment here saying, very interesting talk. Thank you. If I stay open to listen to God, I get the answer that I need.
Wonderful. All right, so now We will go to the other half of our meeting today. We will do our passes and then to our final prayer. But now I'm going to ask Jeanette, can you get the light? Yes, please. And Daniel will play the music. So as we ready ourselves for this next moment, with immense, immense, immense gratitude to our spirit mentors, our guides, to the spirit leaders over the SSB, those noble spirit guides that God has allowed to be here with us, bringing us enlightenment and hope, bringing us solace and inner peace on all layers of our being.